What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Surf and Sales podcast. I'm Scott Leese, here with my good friend and co-host Richard Harris. And today we are joined by Ryan Staley. Ryan is the founder and CEO of Whale Boss in the Chicago area, and just recently kind of stepped off into the solopreneur world somewhere in the last 6 months or so. So welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thank you. I'm stoked to be doing the three-man weave with you guys right now. So it should be a good time. Ready to get into some nuggets and hopefully provide a lot of value for your listeners.
Nice. We are brought to you today and all month long in September by our sponsors lead411.com and gong.io. And we appreciate their support. You guys should check them out. Lead 411 for all of your intent data needs. Gong for your revenue intelligence. Two good companies for you to check out there. So, Ryan, first thing I noticed is you graduated university in 1999, which means we must be basically the same age. So I like that. I'm no longer the baby. And, last couple episodes, Richard has kind of picked on me because the guests have been a little older. So I'm glad I have a peer here.
Just means we have two babies. That's all.
Yeah. So I'm the baby. So we're the babies.
Now it's just twins I got to contend with.
Yeah. So tell everybody, Ryan, about, real quickly, like, what are you up to? What's Whale all about? And, what's your sales, like, background and expertise, so people have context on your comments and our conversation.
Yeah, so they know I'm not just some random on your show that paid to be here. So just to give you a quick snapshot on me, I've been in sales since 1999, actually 1998, Scott. So she brought that up and hit on that. We can get into some of the nuances deeper, but basically in a sales position for about 12, 13 years, and then a sales leadership position for 10, and started off from the grittiest of all areas, door to door, went to inside sales in like a boiler room type environment. So I had that awesome experience. It was almost like hazing. And then on top of it, hit outside sales. And then when I was in the leadership position, one of the things that happened was I was brought there to start kind of rebuild the office and then essentially build an enterprise group from scratch. So over the last 6.5 years, that's what we did, grew revenue from 0 to 30 million in that department, annual recurring revenue with like 4 reps on average. And so my focus has been enterprise sales. And what happened is essentially I decided to move on from the corporate life that I've been living through my entire career and shift into the solopreneur world right now that I'm going to grow into it and really serve others, because I see one of the biggest challenges out there right now is the level of failure that sales folks have in terms of, I was studying whether it's CSO Insights, 67% of people don't even make their quota. You look at other reports with like outside sales, it's like 75% of people don't even make 80% of their quota. So it's getting out of hand, and I've learned a lot by helping others.
Whose fault is that? Who do you blame? Is it the rep's fault or is it executive leadership?
It's a complex question that you have to answer, but I think it's multiple areas. So I think when you look at it, it's a combination of the psychology of the leadership, the training and the development, and the hiring. And then on top of it, you got to look at some of the ownerships on the rep as well. But I think all 4 of those areas kind of.
Let me ask you this. So what's your favorite sports team?
The Bears. The Chicago Bears would be my favorite sports team.
The Bears lose 80% of their games, right?
Mm-hmm.
That means they win what, 3 in a season? Is the coach staying or no?
It depends if the GM just hired him or not.
I don't know about that.
Fair. That's fair.
There's a lot of one and dones these days.
Know.
A lot of one and done.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a great question.
But here's my point. I don't believe that those athletes are any less professional. I don't believe they're any less athletic. There could be some skill stuff there, right? But ultimately, it is up to them to set the right expectations, right, and to manage those to the expectations. Now, to your point, if you've got irreverent people on the team, and those who are cancerous, that can certainly cause some level of effect, but not 80%, in my opinion, 70%, even 60%. So, you know, it's tough. And look, I'm a Bronco fan. We haven't had a lot of winning seasons since Peyton left. So, you know, at some point, you're right, there's a little bit of a rebuilding that goes on. But, you know, I don't think there's enough onus on even the VCs who allow these numbers to be created and accept them as much as, you know, even the CEOs who wish for them.
Yeah, it's a great point. It all ultimately resides at the mentality of the ownership group, whatever ownership group that is, whether it's publicly, VCs, private equity, private, you know, it all kind of flows down from there. But Richard, I think you hit something on the head, man. It's a lot of it's built in a spreadsheet, you know, and say, this is what you have to get, with not always knowing the mechanics behind it.
So what do you say? So, and let's talk about both sides. Like, I'd love, let's say you go in and you work with an organization, particularly on the enterprise side, and maybe it's not 80, maybe they're not missing by 80%, but what do you coach the executive team and the reps? Because there is some truth to this. Like, I won't, you know, I know I sort of get on the soapbox about it, but what do you do as that person who's coming in to give advice? What kind of advice would you give to that executive leader, and what would you give to the team?
Well, and it's kind of like what we teach the sales folks. You really got to understand the situation. You know, there's not going to be a cookie cutter approach, whether it's the challenges are the front of the funnel, like getting the right quantity and quality in the pipe, whether it's the pipe or the execution or the process. It's kind of like system, execution, and process are like the three areas you look at, in my opinion. And then personnel wise, like, and I'm approaching it from the leadership perspective, right? The mentality and the values of the people that you hired, and how they're kind of moving through that. Because, I mean, if you look at it, there's like the art and the science of sales, right? And I know you guys talked to Jake Dunlap about this on one of your most recent episodes, but the execution often falls into the art aspect of it. And, but I think there's some science to that as well. And at the same time, like how people are executing in the individual components, whether, like I said, it's the sales, the pipe, or the other area. So that's from the leadership. You
spent a good amount of time working strategic and enterprise type of accounts, right, Ryan?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What do people misunderstand about the enterprise sales process and closing those kind of deals that you could illuminate for us?
Yeah. So something that I saw a lot is people would spend either months or sometimes even years focused on the wrong person in the account. And what's happening now is, like, you know, you see stats out there that there's like on average 8 people involved in a sales cycle. We were talking enterprise, it could be 15, it could be 30. And they might get positive feedback from one silo that isn't even the budget holder or the future budget holder. And so they'll waste all the time saying the right things to the wrong person. And so as a result, there's so much time that could be cut out in there. So that's one thing, Scott. Something else tangible for you, the listener, is that also when you're looking at it, is cross-pollinating and collaborating both up and down and horizontally with companies. You know, you see a lot of folks that'll get targeted and narrowed in, even if they are focused on the right person. Let's say it's IT, but they never engage the business unit. And so basically integrating those meetings up and down from the C-level down, but then also across those departments. So by the time you're trying to get to the end of the process, you're trying to move a big oil tanker. It's not like there's no more selling left to be done, because everybody's pushing up to the executive team across multiple departments saying, hey, we got to do this. You know, so I would say those are some of the biggest things.
What about pushing something through legal, which is everybody's worst nightmare, right? And the millions of back and forth and red lines and all that kind of stuff. What kind of tips would you give sellers right now who are stuck in this back and forth, and they're like, I know they want to buy, I want them to buy, and the buyer's like, I really want to buy also. What are some cool tips to navigate the legal redlining that you could help us out with?
Yeah. So, and are you saying, when you're talking the negotiation process, or just straight up like legal changes, like legal is just pounding the person because they're trying to mitigate so much risk.
I'm talking about like the contract has been returned back to the seller.
Okay. Gotcha.
The other team's legal department has, taken their red pen out and scratched all over the place. And you're like, oh shit, what do I do now? Right?
Yeah. So something that I've seen work really well, especially with big opportunities, is co-authoring. So like once you kind of get the verbal, like, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to partner. Now we just got to go through the negotiation process, is co-authoring like a project plan with the customer or prospect to completion with actually dates and milestones. So the thing is, if you work collaboratively with them and they start to align all their resources for those dates or those markers, then what happens is if you start going through the legal process and it keeps getting delayed, they'll take onus if you coach them the right way and push back and say, hey, we got resources lined up for the second week of the month, the fourth week of the month, so on and so forth. So it'll leverage them to start pushing them. So I've seen that work really well. Another thing that has been a good tactic too is, it's kind of like you got to find out with them ultimately what their biggest risk, with the biggest risk they're trying to mitigate. And legal, and a lot of times people sometimes people get charged. You think they're getting charged by the letter, or they're getting paid by the letter with the crap that they X out. But in terms of doing that, eventually it gets to the point where you go to your champion, you're like, hey, like this is getting borderline ridiculous. And if they're not on the call, you have them on the call, or you coach them exactly how to work around that. So there's just a couple examples.
Yeah. And then did the experience in the enterprise world give you more confidence to move into entrepreneurship than if you'd been in mid-market or SMB, or is it totally different?
Yeah, I think so. Any kind of sales is entrepreneurship and training, in my opinion. It's like, because half of what you do if you're creating your own company is selling. I don't care what you're selling. Half of it's sales or marketing oriented. So for me, it gave me, I would definitely say it gave me more credit, because throughout that process, I was essentially selling to some of the smartest people in the world, to the biggest companies in the world. And then the cool thing of being a leader is I got a bird's eye view of so many different opportunities. But at the same time, it taught me patience, because the sales cycles are so freaking long. And so throughout that, there was so much grit that had to have been established as a result of it, that I think is like the fiber of my being now. And so like little stuff happens and it doesn't bother me.
We hear this word, and it's interesting because I feel like we've heard the word grit several times in the last week. What does grit mean though? Like, talk about it tactically as well as emotionally. Like, we get the concept, we get it, but particularly in these long, and when you say an enterprise sales cycle, are you talking 12 to 18 months, 2 years? Are you talking 7 figures, high 6 figures?
Yeah. So, I'll give you a frame of reference first, Richard, and it's a great clarifying question. So anywhere from like what I would say, and enterprise is different, but the scope that I'm looking at through the deals were anywhere from 500K to 20 million plus. So that was kind of the range. And then the length, I would say, like the sales cycle length, we did a study on it at my previous position. It was like, on average, it was a 10-month sales cycle with some going a couple years. You know what I mean? From that perspective.
Right. So how do you then, and that's exactly what I wanted to hear. So now define grit.
Yeah. So I think you're right. There's the emotional component. And I noticed like you put a lot of great posts out there about like the emotional aspects of like working through things. And I was going to tell you that I saw that, but that was awesome. I've seen it on LinkedIn. But like, I'll give you an example. So there was a $16 billion company we were selling to, and emotionally, they basically told us after they told us, we're going to move forward with you. And then after that, they told us 2 or 3 times that we can't do this. So it's a deal you're working on for 1.5 years almost, right? And then they tell you, yeah, you're going to get this deal. And then you're getting farther in the process, you're negotiating. They're like, oh, we just found out we still have an agreement with someone on this piece, so we can't do anything.
So what do you do? So that happens, right? You know, you're in. So how do you then tackle that objection?
Right. And well, you just have to, it was so funny because I went through that stage with my team on so many different deals before. It didn't phase me, even though that was the largest deal we ever worked at the time.
Yeah, but what did you do? How did you work it?
Yeah.
I'm pushing you hard because this is what people want to hear this stuff, right?
Yeah. No, so, and that's what I was going to get to, dude. So I love the point in this. So yeah, so essentially what you have to do is you just can't stop. Like people are going to say no at the end of the process or have reasons. And most people fold up like a lawn chair.
But again, what do you mean we can't stop? I'm not letting you off the hook.
No, I'm not trying to get off.
I know. I'm just poking fun at you.
No, that's cool, dude. So like, for example, like to get hyper tactical, they told me that. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk through that. What exactly does that mean? Get really specific. Why can't you do something all of a sudden now versus a week ago, you gave us the verbal approval and the whole committee approved on it. Mm-hmm. And so then the next statement was, well, we found out we have an agreement on this that is, locked in, which it wasn't locked in, right? The customer didn't totally understand what they were engaged with.
So how did you get them to review that, right? Because a lot of time, and I think sales reps get nervous. Oh my gosh, I'm afraid to tell them they're wrong, or, show me the contract. Maybe I can see, which is what we would all want to do.
Right.
How did you coach your team to your point, have grit, be respectful, and help figure that out?
Yeah. I would say that the key ingredient is whenever you have like a massive disruption in a big deal is ask questions, ask clarifying questions, and keep going layers and layers deeper. Because most of the time when you're dealing with big companies, there's misunderstanding about what's truly happening in the company. And they make assumptions on stuff and they just think that that's it. But a lot of times you'll find out like, oh, well, that comes up all the time. This is what you have to do. And you get to the core of what the real objection is versus just taking it at face value.
So what kind of things did you find were the real objection in the essence of, hey, we don't think we can do this because there is a legal agreement? And granted, the prospect may think that, like they may be right, yeah. Oh, legal has told us this, so I can't go against legal.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it was our champion that told me that. Like literally, this is the weirdest thing. I was on vacation with my family at Disney World, and we went to the Olive Garden. I was negotiating the contract in the Olive Garden, which we never go to Olive Garden, but you gotta love some breadsticks and salad, right? And he's freaking me telling me like, oh, we're not gonna go with this agreement. And so it's just like, okay, well, tell me exactly what happened. Sometimes it's political positioning of people that want their own guy in there or gal in there. Sometimes it's just as simple as that. But then you dig deeper. It's like, okay, well, why can't you do that? Well, basically, we have an agreement that's in place. Okay, well, is it cancelable? Well, the one guy says it's not cancelable. Well, have you looked at the agreement? Have you looked at the T's and C's of that agreement? Is there a way where we could adjust the agreement down gradually and shift off it versus all of a sudden, draw a line in the sand and cancel? And who does that person report up to? Like a lot of times there'll be a saboteur in the account that appears at the nth hour. And so that's usually who you're trying to deal with and trying to overcome with that.
I love the use of the word saboteur right there. That's fantastic.
Thanks, man. Always happens.
That might be the title of the episode of how to handle the saboteur of your big deals.
Yeah. I want to know about the commission and the comp on a $20 million deal. Yeah. What should somebody be expecting who's in a sales role where they're literally closing deals of that size and scope? Are we talking about 5%, 10%, 1%? For how many years? How would you structure that comp on that type of a deal? And what should reps be looking for if they're thinking about taking on such a role?
Sorry, cut out, guys. You still with me?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay, so I heard you say, what is the commission size for a $20 million deal? What would...
Yeah, so how would you structure comp on that if you were going to build it out? Is it 1% of the deal, 10% of the deal, 5%? paid out over a few years? Like, how would you structure that, and what should a rep be looking for if they're getting into that type of sales cycle in terms of their comp?
Yeah. So it's a great hard-hitting question, Scott. I love it. The details, the nuts and bolts of it all.
Show everybody the money, Ryan.
To give you, and I'm doing air quotes, a hypothetical example of what one would do in a vacuum in a situation like that. So like in terms of structuring comp, I would say you probably want to have a component where it's paid out upfront, and then also a component that's a residual, because we're talking like total contract value, right? It's like a reoccurring revenue opportunity. And so you could pay, from a comp perspective, you could pay someone anywhere from 20 to 40% of the monthly payment upfront, depending on what your margins are, and depending on what the margin you have in the deal, because there could be a sliding scale there. And then in addition, give them a percentage of residual, because that's going to do a couple of things. It's going to want the rep to stay around, and it's also going to want the rep to support the customer in the way that they need to be supported, because they're continually getting paid off them. And that could range anywhere from, I've seen 2%, I've seen 4% of the monthly spend as well as a residual. So to break it into tangible dollars and cents, because people probably don't have their calculators out if they're driving their car or doing whatever the hell they're doing right now. If you're talking 500K, you got 30%, you could do 150K up front. Maybe you could cap that. Sometimes it's capped at like 100K. And then you get those residuals, which we're talking 3%. That's 15K off that.
What do you do when it's, hey, look, the average deal size is 150K for the year. You've got a structured comp of 10% or something like that, and all of a sudden the whale comes in, right? It's the $1 million deal, and now all of a sudden execs want to be, well, we're not paying you $100,000 on this deal. No. Is that fair? And if yes, great. If no, how does a rep, they need to get to the emotional side of that, but how do they properly negotiate and talk about what should be fair to them?
Yeah. So I'm a big proponent that it's not fair. I've seen those situations, and it's one of the most damaging things in a relationship if you pull back what you committed to in terms of revenue. So I'm really against that, because I've been in that situation before, and it's not cool.
Yeah, it's a real quick way to piss off your sales team.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then it's like an infection that spreads, because everybody talks about that shit. So, and I've been in this situation too, where I've had years where reps were making more than me as a leader, but they just killed it, so that's part of the game, and executives have equity, and executives have other means and levers that they get paid. So I don't think you can look at it in a vacuum. And then Richard, I think the other thing you asked was just about leadership and how to work with leadership. One of the things that I'd encourage folks to do is, when they're evaluating a company to work for, is truly understand if it's a sales-driven company or if it's an operations-driven company.
Yeah, that's a great point. Now, what are the questions somebody might ask in order to figure that out?
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing about LinkedIn. But the questions you could ask is, you could literally say, okay, like, what's the background of the CEO? What's his primary focus in the business? Is he more sales oriented? Does he focus on operations? And that's usually really telling, because if there's a sales driven CEO, from what I've seen in my experience, a lot of times they don't want to do that. They don't want to like pull back commissions or things like that. Whereas the ops guy is always looking at, not always, in some cases, looking at margins all the time. And so that's a really quick question I would use to try and identify that.
But aren't the margins the same? Isn't the margin the same on a 7-figure deal, as well as, and to a certain extent, the margins are even 30 times greater on a big deal?
Yeah, they are. However, they look at it as like, okay, I could improve my EBITDA if for this big deal we only paid out 20% instead of 30%. And because they're looking at it, not always, and it depends on the ownership group, but the investors. And I've seen a lot of operations focused companies take that approach.
I think perhaps perhaps the larger point that he's alluding to, Richard, is a founder or CEO who comes from a sales-driven background is probably going to tread very carefully about diminishing sales commissions and affecting sales leaders and sales reps comp. That's just not where we might go to tinker, right, to try to improve the overall business, where perhaps somebody who's got a finance background, who's in a founder role, that is where they go to tinker straight away. Am I putting words in your mouth, Brian, or is that kind of where you're going?
I agree. So Richard, what have you seen, man? Have you seen the similar parallels with folks or no?
So, in fairness, I haven't been in the end user or the bag carrier role or leadership role in about 8 years. So I think things have gotten better. That's my impression. But I still see it and hear about it. I probably see and hear about it more at the earlier stage startups, because to your point, it's about EBITDA and the next round of funding, and there's some of that. I've encouraged reps to ask for, okay, don't pay me that, give me extra equity.
Mm-hmm.
Give me the equivalent of that in some kind of equity form, or even half the value in equity, so that when this thing goes, I can earn it back later, right? That's sort of the advice I've been trying to give people. And that becomes a whole other, we got to go to the board, and that's a different compensation, and now we're treating somebody different, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, and my answer to that is, yes, but you're also treating me different because you're changing my comp plan. Like, so it's all about what is fair for everyone, not what's the least amount. And it's, I get it. Like, that's the CFO's job. That's, the operations job, but it's also my job too. So, and so it's just one of those things that I think rubs me the wrong way from some deals I've had in my past. And maybe I've just got a hangover from it. And, maybe I just want to be controversial too. So if there's any VCs listening, yes, I'll still work with you, but
no, and that
just expect honest answers.
That's awesome, man. I mean, that's awesome advice, because you're like, hey, listen, I still execute on what I needed to do. And the other thing, this is outside the VC world, but I've seen it also on the other side. I've seen it at a mature company, and then the private owner sells to a private equity company, and they leave things alone for the first few years, but then they start getting stoked and ready to sell, and they want to make the books look as attractive as possible. So they look at ways where they could cut, So there's all sorts of scenarios you run into.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be able to sell it at all if I didn't bring in that big deal, right? Like, that's, again, like, how do you keep battling this argument in a fair way? So I'm going to get off this horse, because we're going deep on it, and I don't need to beat it anymore. But
that's cool.
Thanks for entertaining that part of the conversation.
Now that you're doing, coaching and training and everything, Ryan, and maybe this question goes for Richard too, because you guys are both in the same world now. I want to hear a funny story from you, Ryan, about the worst sales training that you ever got or sat through, and what was so painful about it.
That is such a random question that I would never have expected you to ask, which makes it a great question within itself. For those of you that are listening only, Scott just did an air pump with his fist because he's excited to throw me off.
That's right.
Scott, I think we found our third person to be in the booth on Monday Night Football, right?
Yes.
We found our Dennis Miller, right? He's giving us the color
commentary. I told you we're doing a 3-man weave, So, and I'm just saying all that stuff to give me more time, because I'm still trying to process what my answer is. Man, I've been through some doozies. So I think the worst is like, I've had situations where the guy just goes up there and talks and doesn't engage anybody, and everybody's like blackout, dead behind the eyes after like 30 minutes, and it's like a whole day long meeting. And then he's using like examples that aren't even relatable or relative to what those people are going through, or like the guy has never sold anything in his life, but he's supposed to train you how to sell and has never had any success. So I think those were the two like worst possible experiences that I've seen.
So taking those terrible, miserable experiences that probably a lot of people have been through, what are the things that you're focused on in your own business and delivering training to avoid those pitfalls? And some of them are very obvious, but like, what are some of the training techniques and tactics that you're doing right now to get people fired up, to get them to learn and then apply continuously the things that you've been through, and to keep them engaged?
Yeah. So, and I'm still building some of this out. So the answer I give you today could be completely different in like a month, you know, in terms of being 1,000,000% transparent.
Well,
Something
that's
that
percent transparency about running off and starting your own business. Like, I don't have everything totally figured out yet, but here you are, and you're doing it, right?
Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing that I saw the most success with in getting people engaged and wanting to learn is aligning with their vision and really what the individual wants to accomplish. Because people go through different stages of life where their priorities are different. So at one, it might be, you know, they're looking to get married and start a family and buy a house and earn extra money to align with that. Another might be, say they're more experienced, their kids are going through college and they need to earn extra money for that, you know, or there's different like life events that trigger people to want more. So I try and find those. And if there's not like a key big one, like the ones I just mentioned, there's usually something that they want to move towards. So if you can get that in their head to link to those two things, it gets people to pull instead of pushing them. And then from a communication style, like I believe highly in DISC profiles in terms of communication and like really understand the people you're working with.
I feel like DISC is making a comeback. I've heard it more in the last like couple weeks than I had in the last decade before that.
I swear to God, I'm not just recycling all your old podcast acronyms and terms and stuff like that.
Richard loves all this stuff.
Oh, Richard.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he loves it. All of it. Yeah.
We got to nerd out, man. We got to nerd out on some of this stuff.
It's funny because I was telling Scott that I always knew how to answer the DISC profile to come out as a D, and I went and I used an analyzer, not a sponsor, but a cool tool called Crystal Knows that does analyze you, and it tells me I'm a high I. And I was like, oh, wow, I never knew that. And it really did sort of confirm that I had figured out how to answer the competition questions and how to answer the, you know, win at all costs type questions to prove I'm a high D. And then I even was able to figure out why in certain jobs I was not as good as I probably thought I could be or should be. And I can remember that all the discomfort I felt as me, right? And it's sort of this, you know, this fake it till you make it stuff is, you know, in some ways it works, but in other ways, you know, it can hurt you. So I'm a big fan of all this psychology stuff, if you've ever listened.
Yeah, I love that. We'll have to talk after. I mean, yeah. So like, and I won't go deep on this, Scott, so you don't black out and start checking your email or something.
I love psychology and all that stuff.
Degrees in it.
I'm not a fan of these profiling tests. That's all.
Scott doesn't like recruiters. He wants to recruit his own because he likes psychology so much because it's actually something he studied, and he studied learning, right? If I remember correctly, Scott?
Right. Yeah, I have a master's degree.
So Scott is smarter than all the tests is how I interpret that.
I don't know if that's why.
He's like the human AI of all the personality tests combined.
He is absolutely. I think that's it. The human AI. Scott, you're officially getting that title.
Oh God. I think
more color, by the way, from our color commentator.
16 years ago, I think I got given one of these tests and didn't know, you know, how to answer it properly, like you did, Richard. And I think I answered it in a particular way, and the feedback was like, "Well, this guy's never going to be any good at sales." So you know me, Richard. At that point, I'm like, "Well, fuck this, fuck that test. This thing is useless, right?" I'm still biased from there.
Well, so here, I'll give you a tangible way that's like, in terms of my experience, where it's been legit. So, like, understanding the person you're working with, and like Richard's saying, you know, their inherent strengths or weaknesses, you could work with them in a better way. Because, like, for example, I had a rep that was a high I that killed it, was rep of the year. And then I had a rep that was a high C, which is like very detail oriented introvert, that ended up doing the same thing. and they like being rep of the year, and they both had different strengths and different weaknesses that I had to like supplement when working with them. So
I
like
think
that's something.
Yeah, also think too the challenge I have, and I think this might be maybe underneath Scott's challenge. I'm going to analyze them a little bit. Is that these tests are great at helping you figure out who the rep is, right, and how they're motivated.
Mm-hmm.
But there's zero training to the manager on how to bring out the best in the I or the D. And we're sort of left to our own devices to figure that out. And I think that's changing now. I think that's been a big shift as we talk about the EQ, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the emotional quotient and what that means not only at the rep level but also the management level, right? Like I think that's the piece
Yeah.
that's, and I know that, and I've worked for Scott as well as with Scott, and that's what Scott knows how to do. He knows how to manage those personality types. And when he says, you manage the team but you coach the individual, I don't know a lot of sales leaders who know how to really do that. Scott does. So for as much grief as I like to give Scott, I do know where you're good. So
he's the human AI. He's going to crush that.
he is the human AI.
You're going to hate me after this episode. So anyways, but hey, so check this out. So there's one thing too, and I got to dig into this, guys, but Richard, I don't know if you saw it, but like, so, and Scott, you might actually find this interesting, but with the DISC, there's another layer on it where it's the same line of questioning, like the same DISC test, but then it identifies like the top values of the person taking the test.
Is that the divine? Like there was DISC and then there was divine. Did you ever hear the divine?
No, I haven't heard of that. I got to check it out. Yeah.
DISC was taught to me as like it's an X-ray.
Mm-hmm.
Divine goes into the motivation behind it, right? Richard is get to the point, those kinds of things. And by the way, here's why Richard's that way, and here's how you do need to motivate them in those ways. So it's one's the X-ray, one's the MRI.
Divine is the MRI then, huh?
Love it. Great analogies, guys.
So we got time for two more questions. So the first one is, let's talk about ramp, right? And particularly at the enterprise level, because these deal cycles are so long. How do you, I don't know, and this is a long answer, but how do you choose the right rep that you're willing to give 10 or 12 or 18 months to get that first deal in, right? And how do you look at it? I don't know if personality is right, if it's D's and I's and stuff. And then how do you do it at the comp level too?
Yeah, so it's good because, I mean, I was one of the jobs that, and I had a few over my career that didn't work out for me, was because they didn't give a lot of ramp time, and it was just like, you didn't hit your number and it's 9 months in. How did you not do that? So one of the things that I've seen work solid in that situation is you almost map out like a quarter by quarter plan for them in terms of like a roadmap to get them along the way of building up their pipeline. So basically, like certain metrics in terms of like, let's say if you're talking enterprise and it's new rep, I think you need to give them a year. Like a year is a solid number, especially if the average sales cycle is like 9 months, because they're not going to walk in normally and start a sales process on day one with a new prospect. It's going to take them a little while. The other thing is in terms of comp, structuring it is around like the pipeline and so like kind of the metrics component of like first appointments versus converted opportunities with both quantity and size, if you will. And then kind of look at that quarter over quarter, and you could offer like a bonus component if they hit those metrics, or like a guarantee if you're integrated in there. So those are a couple of things that I've done in the past that seem to work pretty well. And if people aren't hitting their benchmarks 3 months in or 6 months in, you have a problem, and it's really crystal clear on what they have to do because they agree upon it when they sign on. So it's part of their offer letter, if that makes sense.
I want to go just barely backwards because you said something about, I'm getting grief basically. I've been here 9 months and somebody's, mad I didn't hit my quota yet or whatever. Like, what I want to know is, how do you suss out whether you've made a bad hire when it's going to take 9 to 12 months to really have like given them the proper amount of time to go through a full sales cycle and close a deal. Like, is there any way for me to know, right? Other than just, is it just like there's no activity or, no pipeline showing up? Like, how do I know? Is there a way for me to know, like, oh man, I screwed up, I should flush this person out sooner? Is that an impossible task in a super long sales cycle world?
Well, I don't think it's an impossible task. I mean, there's the qualitative component is you see how they interact and how customers align and engage with them. But at the same time, there is the numbers aspect. So it's like you're taking the quota and breaking it down into more micro components so that it's just like setting a goal, right? Like if you set a goal that's very general and broad, you don't know if you hit it, you don't know what's going on. But if you give them specific metrics and they're tracking, then it gives you a sense of if they're on track. And here's what I would say too, Scott, that'll help out versus like, oh, this person's great in front of customers, but they never convert anything. You know what I mean? It kind of like, you got the tangible aspect and then you got the subjective aspect. You kind of burn them together. You know what I'm saying? So that's how I would approach it.
That's great. Good.
That's really solid. So we gotta go with our last question in a minute, but before we do, again, just a shout out to Lead 411 with the best intent data and direct dial phone numbers, as well as Gong.io, who recently got another huge round of funding. So, we're very appreciative to our sponsors to let us have these conversations. So, Ryan, what can we do to help you? How can we do something to support you? Whether it's a cause, obviously, please give out your contact information aside from LinkedIn. You've been very gracious with your ideas, but is there a cause you're out looking for? Do you have some advice that you want to ask? We're happy to answer and support you.
Yeah, so I would say like it's been awesome to be on the show with you guys, and I'm really early on in my journey right now. So like I'll ask for advice. I'm gonna hit the advice button. Dennis Miller's gonna hit the advice button right now. I'm still in the stage where I'm growing and developing, and then the whole purpose design behind it though is to start increasing my contribution to the world and making an impact. But right now, Daddy's got to bring home the bacon, So in light of that, I wouldn't say you guys are grizzled veterans, but you guys have some amazing experience, or farther along this path than I am. So like, what if you were me, right? And I'm 4 months in. What's the most important thing you would focus on right now? And you've seen some of my stuff that you would advise me to do or recommend that I connect with, or anything along those lines. I would just love to hear your feedback.
Well, first of all, I am hardly a grizzled veteran at this. This is literally my 12th month on my own. So my fiscal year, if you want to call it that, will end at the end of September. So, Richard, this is a better question for you, perhaps, than me.
Yeah, Scott pretends to be the babyface assassin. So, so these are the things I would tell you to focus on. One, getting customers. You're going to cut some deals early that you would never cut again, in a year from now. And that's okay, because you want the story. You trade out the story for the price, right? You trade out the logo, the case study. By default, in every one of my contracts, it says that people will agree to a case study. I get a CEO quote, I get a VP of sales quote, and I get a sales rep quote. A good 50 to 60% of people don't even read that part of the contract, right? Some will negotiate it out, and I'm okay with that. But it also gives me leverage for when it does come down to cutting some of those deals. Like, wait, I got to use this stuff, there. And sometimes they'll say, when mutually agreed upon. I'm like, okay, fine, no problem. Add that phrase. But make sure that's in all your contracts. I think to what you are already doing is just keep putting out quality content on LinkedIn so people know your name and your voice, and whether and at least join one community of whether it's Modern Sales Pros or Revenue Collective or Rev Genius or Sales Hacker. Be a voice in one of those communities. It's hard to do multiple. I'm running into that challenge now because everybody wants me to do stuff, and I'm happy to, but I kind of have to feel like, okay, I could spend my whole day writing responses to shit if I'm not careful. So those are the two main things that I would tactically look at. I also think you need to understand what your value is, right? Like, what do you bring? Look, if you're closing enterprise deals, your pricing needs to be at that value. not at, maybe you take a small gig for, under, for 4 figures just to get a couple of logos and stuff. But after that, you're worth way more than that, in my opinion. So I'll pause there and see what Scott wants to add.
Yeah, I've been trying to think of what to add. I think what has worked well for me is to have lots of different revenue streams and ways to bring in money. And this is a little bit contrarian to people who tell you just go real deep on one thing, find your niche and like just do that. I don't know that I've done that and followed that advice. I have advisory gigs, I have private coaching clients. Richard and I do surf and sales events, surf and sales podcasts, generates revenue. Thursday night sales community now generates revenue. I wrote a book. I just finished writing my second. So I have all of these different like creeks and streams feeding into, Lake Scott, if you will, right? And I think that really helped me like take the pressure off, maybe like, I gotta find, X number of clients as fast as possible so I can pay the bills. It's more like, no, okay, I got these little, funnels kicking in some cash and whatnot, so I can, take my time a little bit. So I think diversification, how many different ways can you make money? How many different types of offerings can you have, as opposed to, not that this is you, but as opposed to like Scott only does sales trainings with this type of company on these days. Like that just feels like very limiting to me.
Right.
So that would be my only kind of add-on is look at different ways that you can bring in revenue to yourself.
I will jump onto that, and I will say that Scott and I have different approaches, and I built my business differently than Scott.
Yeah.
And I tell you, and we talk about this. We talk about, well, how much are you bringing in? We sort of compete a little bit. And in Scott's first year, he's crushing me, like in sincerity. So there is some truth to this, and I believe it. And it's forced me to actually start looking at some different things differently in my business. So to anyone who's listening, I think it's solid advice for anyone, and that you need to do what you need to do to be good for you. So
yeah, no, that's awesome advice from both of you guys. Some great nuggets in there. So I love it.
Yeah.
Thanks for the feedback.
Well, thanks so much for spending some time with us this afternoon, Ryan. We appreciate it, and stay in touch and let us know how we can support you and your new endeavor.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, guys.
And where can they email you? People want to listen. If they want to contact.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually have a show that I launched called the Sales and Marketing Built Freedom Podcast, and then on LinkedIn, you connect with me on LinkedIn, DM me, and then my email is ryan@whalesellingsystem.com.
Cool. Awesome, man. Thanks again, Ryan.
All right. Thank you.